Some American families and Democrats up for election got a bit of good news this week. Something in the economy is working, according to new census data, finding that U.S. median household income shot up 5.2% last year, the largest yearly gain since the late 60s. The number of people living in poverty fell 13.5%. Democrats say this proves Donald Trump's more doom and gloom picture of the country isn't quite reality. But when you dig deeper, there are nuances to some of these numbers. Adamy is news editor for the Wall Street Journal. She's been digging in to this data, and she joins us now. First and foremost, of course, I do want to dig into some of these numbers in some of these states. But when we look at an election year, are there economic indicators that can sort of give us maybe a predictor of how the race could go?
Well, certainly. I mean, the good economic growth numbers that came out at the beginning of the week, very good for Democrats, very good for the Clinton campaign. You heard her talking a lot about this, not a lot from Donald Trump. So on the one hand, a very good piece of news for Hillary Clinton in that incomes across the country are going up this week. But when we dig in and we start to look at the swing states,
yeah, let's put that graph up for our viewers, because it's really telling, and this is research that you guys have done in particular.
At the Journal, we did our own analysis to say, hey, you know, the election's really going to be decided by about 13 states that are in play. And let's go back to 2008, and that's kind of how people are thinking the last uncontested or the last non-incumbent election. And so what do Americans feel like their incomes have done since 2008? And we were really surprised by what we found.
Yeah, I mean, look at Nevada.
Very strong picture showing that swing states have disproportionately seen much lower income growth than the rest of the country. So what you'll see from that graph, dead last in terms of income growth, Nevada, Georgia, and Arizona. And this suggests a more challenging picture for the Democrats.
Okay, a more challenging picture for the Democrats, but you had given two examples where that may not necessarily be the case. And I thought that was really interesting.
Exactly. So we see, you know, Nevada at the very bottom, but then we see Georgia and Arizona. So these are two states that have been, you know, Republican strongholds for at least 2 decades. And yet just now the polls are showing they have come into play. They're much tighter than people expected. So I think what we have is, like many things in this election, you know, it's been unpredictable. And the demographic forces that are happening there and changing those states, they may be as powerful as the issues. So, for example, Arizona, huge influx of Latinos there. Georgia has also become a lot more diverse. You have African Americans who are moving from northern states back to the Atlanta area. Also a pretty big growth in the Asian population there, too. So those are states where I think the kind of people that have moved into the state may be as big of a factor as anything.
When you break down some of the trends, do you have any really interesting tidbits when you look at urban areas and suburban areas, especially those voters, how they could be voting this election cycle?
We did. So there have been some patterns over the last couple of years. Urban income growth has well outpaced rural income growth up until now. But when you kind of dig into that, there's some sub-patterns. So interestingly enough, suburban income, so for years, suburban areas were the places where people really went to. You know, you started making money, you bought the big house, you got the big yard, you got the pool. Not happening anymore. The strongest income growth has been in the core urban areas, core city, large to medium-sized cities.
Anything that has to do with millennials?
I think it does have something to do with millennials. I mean, the reporting that we've done shows that, you know, increasingly young Americans, they want to live in the cities. They're also delaying having kids, so they're staying in the cities for longer periods of time. And the suburbs, at the same time, have seen much weaker income growth.
When we see, and Fox News did a recent poll, who is trusted better to handle the economy, and Clinton was at 44%, Trump at 51%. Does that sort of go with the trend, when I look at the graph where you see all these states that aren't necessarily seeing that much growth? Maybe they want someone who's not the status quo in office.
I think what this tells us is that people, you know, an interesting wrinkle to the income numbers, yes, they were good for 2015, but incomes are still down below where they were before the recession. Okay. And so a lot of people, they just don't feel like they've gotten ahead, right? And so to the extent that they're looking at another Democratic administration, they say, hey, my income has been lousy after 8 years. I don't have a lot of confidence it's going to get much better under another Democratic administration.
Okay, so perhaps we saw these good numbers, but maybe not necessarily something to completely celebrate this week.
No, I think you have to, there are the numbers and then there are how Americans feel. And so it's certainly a plus for the Clinton campaign that they can point to these policies, that they can make the argument that things are getting better. But a lot of Americans don't feel that way.
Right. All right. Janet, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure,
really
Elizabeth.
Appreciate it. And for any of our viewers, this is a really interesting, especially when you break down some of these states. They can find it on your website.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.